Hi guys, this is Alana Terry. Thank you for joining us. This is a special episode of the Unabridged Christian Fiction Podcast. So this is our Torn Asunder Aftershow. It's going to have spoilers. So if you haven't finished listening to Torn Asunder, that's all of season 3. You can go all the way back to the beginning, starting with chapter 1. If you have listened to Torn Asunder, this is the after show where we're going to go behind the scenes, and I have a super good friend to introduce to you guys, Jaime Hampton. We're going to be chatting together. So hi, Jaime.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for doing this. You're doing me a favor by being here. So Jaime and I have been friends and prayer partners forever. Some of you might recognize her voice because Jaime and I co-host the Praying Christian Women podcast. So if you're ever in the mood for some Christian nonfiction for women, join us at the Praying Christian Women podcast. But right now, we get to talk about fiction stuff. So let's dive in.
Okay, well, this was great. So I was on the fence for many years as to which Alana Terry novel was my favorite. And after rereading this, I think this one is my favorite. The Whispers of Refuge series is definitely my favorite. Just, I think I don't read a lot of fiction other than doing edits for you or, and so sometimes I love fiction. I love reading, but I just don't lately. Like in the last few years, for whatever reason, I mostly read nonfiction. And I wonder if that's why I love it so much because, well, I guess we'll get into it later, but being podcast minded, thinking about prayer all the time. I'm just the other day, or it was yesterday, in our Take 10 Tuesday thing where we do like a 10-minute prayer thing, it was prayers of supplication. And one of the ones that came to my mind was prayer for the persecuted church. Because of reading this book, it totally inspired me and fired me up to be praying for the persecuted church. So I love it. I love this whole series because it is so rooted in fact and what's really going on behind the scenes. When you read these anecdotes of what people are going through, it's really what people are going through. A lot of this was inspired by your research.
Right. Well, and I love that you kind of tied it into prayer, because that really was my goal when I first started writing novels. It was like, I think I had 2 dreams, and one was to raise, for lack of a better phrase, a buttload of money for Liberty in North Korea, which, is an organization that I just love and absolutely support, and to encourage and inspire people to pray specifically for North Korea and kind of more in general for the persecuted church. And so it's really cool to, Torn Asunder, I think was published in maybe 2014. I mean, we're talking, 5 years or more. And I hadn't read it in years either. And I re-listened to it to get ready for this season of the Unabridged podcast. And for me, I love that it's your favorite, although it kind of hurts my heart because there are so many others. I'm like, oh, but you don't like, it's like if you came and told me that one of my children was your favorite. No, I have a favorite.
I know the one that's your favorite. You know what? And that one is another one of my favorites. You're talking about?
Are we talking about Flower Swallow?
Flower Swallow. Yeah. That actually, you know what? It might be tied. Okay. So
wait, I need to interrupt you. Did you see Woong in Torn Asunder?
Oh, absolutely. My first question was, did you add him later, or did you write this book knowing that he would have a book?
Okay, so for those of you who haven't read Flower Swallow, there's the little boy Woong, and Hannah mentions him a couple times because he's one of the flower swallows, which is the name given to the street children that she took care of. So I think writing Torn Asunder, first of all, I had learned the term flower swallow and thought it was just beautifully poetic. So yes, I think at the time I wrote Torn Asunder, I knew that I was going to write a book called Flower Swallow about one of these like street urchins, for lack of a better phrase. And so I figured, I may as well give him a name in this one so that I can use him later kind of as a callback. But his story was not fleshed out at all. Like I had no idea what his personality was. Basically, I just had a name and the fact that he was a flower swallow.
And that's funny because after, I think I read it maybe two times prior to reading it to prepare for this interview to refresh my memory. And I
Right.
didn't remember his name from those times. And I thought, did she go back and add his name? Because he mentions her by name in his book
Right.
in
Yes.
Remembering Back. So
Right.
of course I recognized her.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wondered that. That's very cool. And that is
No,
what I
he's in there as a little Easter egg. Yep.
yeah, that's so cool. And I love the what I love about this series is the interconnection of all the characters, and just kind of, if you're like Whispers of Refuge or even just an Alana Terry book fan and you've read a lot, the Kennedy
Mm-hmm.
Stern series has references, and like at the
Yeah.
very end, not to spoiler, but like at the very end of this book, Ian is referenced as
Yes. The
the
journalist.
redheaded
Yep.
journalist that popped
Mm-hmm.
up. And in the beginning you didn't know, is this a good guy or a bad guy? Does he have good intentions or bad
Mm-hmm.
intentions? It was neat. I
Mm-hmm.
really have loved putting some of the pieces together of different people throughout the different
Yeah, there's
books.
lots of Easter eggs, and there's a tie-in. So if listeners haven't read the Kennedy Stern series, that's as of right now probably the most popular series I have out. And Kennedy's parents are the ones running the secret seminary and things like that. So I came up with the idea of this missionary couple first, and then from there I was like, oh well, I knew eventually I wanted to write some books set in the States, so that's how that came about. And then yeah, there's the Easter egg with the red-haired journalist who appears, I think up until my romance novels he appeared, even if he wasn't named in all of my books. And so there's just like mentions of a journalist or mentions of something, so that's kind of fun. And then he has bigger roles in some of the other Whispers of Refuge North Korea books, but a
And he
really
has
fun
his
one.
own book.
He does. Yeah, yeah. The out of North Korea.
Is
Um,
that considered Whispers of Refuge, or is that because it takes place in
Basically,
Korea?
this is the hardest of the series to call a series, because
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of overlapping characters, but it's not like you watch a season of a TV show and then you go to season 2 and it's the exact same characters just a
Right.
year later. Like it's not really like that. So it's a little bit trickier. But yeah, technically it's one of the North Korea books. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's out of North Korea. Oh, so the other really fun Easter egg. I don't know, Jim, if you've read many of the romances, but
Some, but not
okay,
many.
so let me give it
Yeah.
this is going to end up being like a triple spoiler. Or actually, I think it's mentioned maybe in one of the Kennedy books. But Hannah and Simon, when they get to the States, they end up adopting the daughter of one of the women in one of the
Yes.
romances.
Yes,
And
I read that was one of okay, so the yeah,
don't
because
ask me which one.
no,
I'm
I
not
know I'm
going to
thinking back, but I'm like,
remember.
that was one of my favorite books too. Was that the
Mm-hmm.
one that wasn't with Tiff, was it? With the
Nope, nope.
no,
It's
because she kept her baby. It was,
yeah, yeah. So
but
I
yeah, that
forget the
was one of
woman's name, but it's the one with Ricky. He's the kind of like bumbling. He's really awkward, but like in a really cute, endearing way. He's totally
yeah.
like not the alpha male.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I loved that book too. Yeah, I have a lot of favorites. So, and I would say within each series, I have my favorite books too.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
it's hard to pick. So,
It is. The thing with Torn Asunder, it has a special place for me because I feel like some of my this is going to sound weird for me as the author being the one to say, but some of my books I feel are really good and they sell a lot of copies. And other books of mine are like, okay, this wasn't great, and so it doesn't sell a lot of copies. Torn Asunder I feel like is disproportionately, like it's kind of one of these like hidden gems. It's not many people start Alana Terry by reading Torn Asunder. Like it's kind of tucked in there in the middle of the North
mhm.
Korea series. And even the North Korea series in itself, like it's for some series like the Kennedy Stern series, you just start at book 1 and you just go, and they read fast and it's just you're in this world. Like the North Korea books, I don't expect that many readers read them like back to back to back to back to back because they're pretty heavy, and I don't write them back to back. Like when I was still working on Kennedy, I could write 3 Kennedy books a year and it didn't feel like that big of a deal.
Mhm.
The North Korea books, it's like one every year and a half, just they're heavier. So I feel like Torn Asunder is kind of special to me because it's it's, like an impactful book with a lot of soul in it, and yet not many people find it.
Well, I was wondering about that. Not to dig into your like business
Yeah,
side
yeah,
of things,
yeah.
but I was
Mm-hmm,
wondering, is
mm-hmm.
this a big seller or is this kind of hanging,
No, no, this is really like a very, very hidden one.
Yeah. Well,
Which,
I love it. I love it.
yeah,
I
it
can't
was
wait to
really
talk
fun
about it.
for me to go back and re-listen to. Also, there was the part where, so again, warning, we're talking spoilers. We're going into this assuming listeners have read it, but the part where Moses reveals himself, I remember I
Yes.
was re-listening to that and I was like, oh, like I know it was coming, obviously, because I'm the one who wrote it, but it still kind of got me excited.
I was listening. So I half listened, half read the book. So I listened
Okay.
on the
Mm-hmm.
podcast and then I half read it just to, over the course of
Mm-hmm.
a week or two. And that chapter where it ended with I am Moses,
Yeah.
that happened as I was like lying down listening to it before bed. And that was like what
Uh-huh.
I ended the night on. I'm like,
Oh.
cliffhanger, even though I've read the book, but I'm like, wow, what a cliffhanger.
I had
So
I had a lot of fun writing that and re-listening to that. And Jamie, I think you know this, but listeners probably don't. Just the degree of difficulty that I have writing Moses. So Moses shows up in a couple other novels, but he's just been really, really an intimidating character. And so it was fun for me to go back and read Moses, because my memories of Moses are memories of feeling very like he stresses me out as a character. But when I went back to listen to it, I didn't sense that, like just listening to it more as a reader, it was like, okay, here's Moses. He's, got this double life. He's, a complex character. And I didn't get, as the reader or the listener, just all of the drama that went into writing him, which was kind of cool, because I think I had in my mind that since Moses was so hard for me personally, that he would almost be hard for readers or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
no, it does. And oh, I hear coffee
Can
back
you
there.
hear? Let me pause and open the door real quick.
Okay, hang on.
La, la, la. Okay, so yeah, we just got a new puppy, so she's it's funny because it used to work out perfectly that Jamie and I would do recordings like this or for the Praying Christian Women on the same day that my youngest son goes to a homeschool co-op class. But now he's the one who's like most responsible for keeping the puppy entertained, and so she doesn't know what to do with herself.
That's too funny. She is really cute.
She's a sweetie. Yes. Okay,
But
where were
back
we?
to
Oh,
Moses.
Moses.
Okay,
Back to
so
Moses.
so this picture I have of Moses, it like when I re-listened, I was a little surprised at first at how, even though I knew reading this that he was who he
Mm-hmm.
was, I was a little bit surprised at how he was able. I mean, still, it was like Groundhog Day. Like, whoa, how is he
I
able to
know.
lead this double life and to do it so,
Mm-hmm.
um,
So
like, so
convincingly.
unemotionally,
I
almost, even though
know.
you know that he has the emotion going into it. But yeah, and so it wasn't until he and Hannah met and she was kind of
Mm-hmm.
scared, and then he like
Yeah.
showed his compassion toward her a little bit and kind
Right.
of like soften the edges,
Mm-hmm.
that I was like, okay, I can relax now. He's who he really is. But
He is,
yeah,
but then, you've got the whole part where he basically sends here I am forgetting my own character's names. Is it Soon? Is that the young man?
yes,
Kind of his
yes.
underling. He basically sends Soon to his death. And you've got to wonder, is this okay? So let me tell you the story behind Moses. So I this is funny. I had to stop reading the Voice of the Martyrs newsletter,
Hmm.
not because it was like sad or depressing, but because it would get me so sidetracked, because every single story I would be like, I want to turn this into a novel. And so I remember years ago reading, I forget if it was a Voice of the Martyr newsletter, or it might have actually been a video they created about like the underground church in North Korea. But they talked about this secret police. So basically Moses, but definitely not as high up, but like a local policeman or something like that, who was a Christian, but had to be a Christian in total secret. so that not even other Christians in his town knew who he was. And it was kind of the same thing. Like he did it in hopes that, every so often he could give people warnings or save some people. But he also knew that basically his brothers and sisters in Christ thought he was the enemy because they didn't know. And he had this just heartbreaking quote about how he couldn't wait for heaven, just knowing that then he could reveal himself to his family, his brothers and sisters. And so that's kind of what got the idea of Moses going for me, was like, I could never do what he does, and I'm not sure I could even justify what he does, but I'm also glad that there are some people who could. Do you know what I mean? Like, he lives in such a murky world. He has lots of blood on his hands, and yet his role is important for the church, and so I feel so conflicted. And I think that's why he was such an intimidating character to write, because like, he scares me, someone who can be that detached and unemotional about things and yet still be a believer. Like, that's frightening.
Well, and you bring up several really important open-ended questions through your characters. And one of them is what he does right? Is it necessary? And, along with other questions about, like, well, is it right to lie when you're a missionary and you're asked what you've been up to? I mean, Hannah struggles with that. But with Moses, I think that the way that he is portrayed is like the fact that the reason that he's able to do what he does is because he is so eternity minded that when he actually basically kills one of the,
Yes, Levi.
Levi, yeah, he's kind of like, I did have mercy on him. He's better off than any of us. He's free with Jesus.
If I'm being tortured to that degree, I would for sure see that as a mercy killing. But again, I would never be able to operate in that sphere of things.
No, and you could still debate, was that murder? Is that right? Is that okay in the eyes of God? Or I mean, sure, there are lots of those questions, but in his mind, he's looking like, okay, I can endure this. Like, for him, hell on earth, really.
Oh, for sure.
Being who he is, so that, in his mind, that people will ultimately, the cause will be furthered and God's purposes. But yeah, there's still lots of gray area.
Oh, for sure. I think you might even be giving him more credit than he deserves, just in terms of being eternity minded, because the other way to look at it is, I mean, he's doing a lot to save his own skin too. Do you know what I mean? Like,
that's true. Right. He's living a good life, smoking his cigars or cigarettes, right? Smoking his cigarettes, sitting back in his chair.
Yeah. I think that his character would be totally different if it weren't for the conversations that he has with Soon, where they're able to speak a little more freely, like when they're outside, when they're like free from the recording devices and things like that. I think that if it weren't for those conversations happening, he would be more one-dimensional. Is my dog snoring? What's going on? Is she growling? Can you hear that?
I heard something. Is she in your room right now?
Kitty is the older one. I left the puppy with one of the other boys. But
yeah,
anyway.
no, Kitty might be snoring or growling.
Well, and I like how you compare Hannah and Moses. They kind of are the two polar opposites. They both want to spread the gospel. They both want to serve the Lord. And Hannah goes into it very naively. It's like, well, no, of course you shouldn't lie. No, of course I'm going to give my food to these little kids who don't have anything, even though that means I'm not going to have anything. Like, she goes into it very, very simply. Whereas, Moses, can't. He'd be dead like decades ago if he operated that way. And I don't know, maybe because we live in such a sinful, broken world, I think the argument could be made that we need Christians who are able to kind of take it from both sides. But it's so hard because you get into such murky water.
You do. And, she goes into it with such a, like, almost stoic Christianity, where she's, I mean, through the entire thing, she's like, God's going to be mad at me if I don't, will God be upset with me for saving one granola bar? Or, is God going to be, surely God won't be angry with me for what was the other one? I gotta go look in my notes because I wrote a couple of them.
No, but
But
I know what you mean. Like she does
oh,
operate some out of fear. Oh, do you have it in your notes?
for the clandestine reading of the Song of Solomon, like
Oh,
she feels guilty because she reads Song of Solomon and is like, mildly flushed about it, and she's like, I'd better not read that again until I'm married, and it said, like just berating herself.
right. She does. Yeah, I felt sorry for her too. Or, when she and Simon are separated, and part of her is like, well, did God just get mad at me because I loved him too much? And
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what, Simon himself talks about that kind of love is an idol that God would have to
Yeah.
put aside. And so they
Hmm.
both have this. Now, when I read this for the third time or fourth time, whatever it was,
Hmm.
the first few times, and especially the first time I read it, I actually came away from it being like, Simon doesn't deserve her. She's way
Hmm.
too spiritual for him, almost. Not like,
Hmm.
you
No,
know,
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
and reading it this time, I don't know what changed. And maybe it was kind of a gradual changing through the other times I read it too. But this time reading it, I was struck by pretty much one of the big themes of the book, which is never judge someone for not passing a test that you
Yeah.
yourself have not had to take, and
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
that you yourself have not had the opportunity to pass. And, you know, he, she never had to sit and watch him be tortured.
That's true.
He had to sit and watch her be tortured. He loved her so much that that was what made him break so quickly, was that
That's
she
really
was right there in
interesting.
front of him.
Yeah.
But as
Yeah.
I read it this time, I was like,
Hmm.
well, wow, Simon, I don't see him this time around as being less
Hmm.
strong or being weaker than her,
Right.
because I wonder if she had to sit and watch him have his,
Hmm.
fingernails pulled out one by one, would
Oh,
she
yeah.
have
Hmm.
buckled? I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, it's interesting reading it again that I had a much higher opinion of Simon, and I was like, oh, totally. They both had their share of difficulties. They were both
Hmm.
strong in their own ways.
In their own ways, yeah. His strength comes from just wanting to protect her. That's what
Yeah.
he puts above everything else. And for her,
Mhm.
it's the mission,
Yeah.
above all else. So, yeah, that also came about from a Voice of the Martyrs newsletter where, I was reading about, I forget if they used the term secret seminary. I think it was a little different, like an underground seminary or something like that. But, it's very similar. North Korean refugees who escaped to China, got training, and then voluntarily returned to North Korea with the gospel. And one of the things that they talked about was how they were sent out one by one because
Hmm.
it was so dangerous. And, the argument can be made, yeah, if Simon hadn't followed Hannah, none of their troubles would have come upon them. Like that's the entire reason why they were sent out one by one, is because the Sterns, or the people sending them out, in the real world today, know that they're going to do what they can to try to protect each other. But I just thought that was a horrible, horrible thing. Even Jesus sent his disciples out two by two, and just
Hmm.
that sense of spiritual isolation and things. But I think it's hilarious, your comment that, like, Simon doesn't deserve her, because she comes across as very much more spiritual. Simon struggles, he breaks under the pressure of interrogation, he breaks the rules like on day one of his mission by following her and going with her,
Right.
but he is so loyal and
Hmm.
protective of her, and that's important too, for sure.
It is. Another, well, kind of back to the prayer burden that I got out of this, the one thing that stuck out to me the most in this book that inspired me to pray for the persecuted church was, there's this scene, and oh, what is the character? Well, anyway, you'll
The
remember
old
maybe.
man, or which one?
In Prison with Simon, where
Mm-hmm.
he says, um, I want Moses to be real, because there's this question, does he exist, or
Mhm.
is it just a
Right.
myth, or
Right.
and he said, I want him to be real because I want to know that someone on the outside sees my suffering and knows that I'm a real flesh and blood person. I don't even care if I get
Mhm.
released. I just want to know that I'm known and seen by
Yeah.
someone on the outside. And that broke my heart, because I know that that's
Mhm.
not a fictional sentiment.
Oh, for
It's a
sure.
fictional sentence, but that
Yeah,
has to
that
be
mindset.
an actual feeling for anyone, whether they're in prison, whether they are a Christian living in a persecuted nation where they can't let their Christianity be known,
Yeah.
or, where there is a lack of Christian fellowship. But just, I want someone to know that
Mhm.
I'm seen, And so
Yeah.
that was my prayer is, let these people that are suffering or that are being persecuted or that are isolated in these places
Hmm.
know that they're known, know that they're seen,
I
know that
love
they're being
that.
prayed
Yeah.
for,
Hmm.
and that they are not alone, that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some of that idea came out of this like insanely vivid dream, like the most vivid dream I think I've ever had. And a lot of my passion for the persecuted church came because like when I was a teen and young adult, I would have nightmares about being persecuted for my faith. And as a total aside, that's just curious and interesting. I don't have those dreams anymore. I think they stopped like as soon as I wrote The Beloved Daughter, which was my first novel about persecution. But I had this dream where I was some kind of like ambassador's wife and our country was taken over and I ended up kind of like a political prisoner. But I remember sobbing my heart out, and it wasn't because I had lost my freedom. It wasn't because I was scared. It was because nobody knew where I was and nobody knew what was happening to me. And I woke up crying, and my husband, was trying to be like, hey, you're asleep. He thought it was almost like to the degree of a night terror or something. And for like 10 minutes, I kept telling him like, no, this is real. And looking back, I'm like, okay, no, it wasn't real. But it felt so much like I was like put into someone else's consciousness, and I don't believe that happened on a spiritual level, but just in my mind, that's how real it felt. And that sense of nobody knows where I am, nobody cares. It's a heartbreaking, terrible, terrible feeling.
Yeah. Well, another thing that kind of was an interesting topic that just didn't really get fleshed out, but just sort of like tip of the iceberg kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
was this idea that these Western missionaries who have never set foot in North Korea are, there's definitely a contrast between their life
Yes.
and the lives of Hannah and Simon and all of the secret missionaries, secret
Secret seminary students.
seminary
Yeah.
students. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, even in the beginning, they're talking about, wow, this whole year of eating all of Mrs. Stern's home cooked food didn't really
Right.
prepare us for what we had to do. If only we had just,
Yeah.
come right from the famine into,
Mm-hmm.
and then,
Mm-hmm.
going back to the end where she, Hannah comes to the door and Mrs. Stern is thinking about what to cook for dinner, and there's
Right.
Scrabble
Right.
game upstairs that's
Mm-hmm.
unfinished, and her daughter at college. Like, um, what are your thoughts, and kind of what conversations would you love people to be
Yeah.
having about
I'm so
this?
glad you picked up on that and brought it up. So the Sterns, especially in Slave Again, which is the book that I wrote right before Torn Asunder, that also deals with the Sterns and the refugees and the secret seminary and things. People came away from reading that, and a lot of them like really disliked Mrs. Stern specifically because she comes across as just worldly, and she's got this chocolate addiction, and she wastes her time fretting about her daughter who's tucked away safe at Harvard, which if you read the Kennedy books, she's not safe at Harvard.
Right.
But like a super privileged life. um I don't remember the details because it's been a while, but like I believe Juliet like grew up as an ambassador's daughter overseas or something. Like she comes from privilege. And I think in a way you could see them as, and this isn't how I see it, but I get why some readers see them as kind of like, this is the worst of Christian American missionary life. Because you're living it up. You've got your big house in this gated expat community. You've got your, Chinese housekeepers who are doing your bidding. And what are you doing all day other than baking brownies and sending your daughter emails when she's.
Checking your email compulsively for your
Yes,
daughter's latest
yes.
message.
I do believe that some people could look at them and kind of sit in judgment. And then that's where I go right back to Mr. Stone. Like, don't judge someone if you haven't been in their shoes. Don't
Yeah.
judge someone who fails a test you haven't passed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like so I think that I don't want to say I carry around guilt, but I am very aware of the fact that I am very privileged and blessed. And okay, if you look at me and the people in my neighborhood, we're sitting right at average. But if you look at, the blessings that our family has comparative to everyone across the world, I'm certainly no better than Mrs. Stern playing Scrabble and eating chocolate all day. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Oh
And
yeah.
part of me wants to say, well, at least she's out there, you
Right. At
know?
least she's training missionaries in China as
Exactly.
opposed to right.
Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of it is for me, yeah, I know that there's a dichotomy. Like I've done a little bit of stuff on the mission field and definitely got the sense, okay, the missionaries are living at such a higher level than the people they're serving. And it left kind of a bad taste in my mouth. But then I thought about it. I'm like, well, I'm not out there. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think I don't have the answers for that. I think it was just maybe my way of working it out on the page, because if I were struggling every day, if I were in constant fear of police coming in and deporting me or anything even close to that, I couldn't write the novels I write, which I know are
Right.
inspiring people and things. So I feel like people could look at me with that same sense of judgment that they look at Mrs. Stern and be like, well, who are you to try to be doing anything? Like, your kids are healthy, your family's safe. I'm like, okay, my kids are healthy and my family's safe. That gives me the blessing of the time and mental space that it takes to write these novels. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I do.
So
No,
yeah.
I think we need more of that grace in every aspect
Mm-hmm.
of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's what I love about what I consider to be a huge theme.
Yeah.
What are the exact words? Never judge a person, never judge someone.
Who fails a test that you have yet to take, or maybe
Okay.
that you have yet to pass. I forget, and
Right.
it might
But either
alternate.
way, yeah, who fails a test that you have yet
Mm-hmm.
to take or yet to pass. But
Yeah.
I think that should just it's like it's like a different version of don't judge someone unless you've walked a mile in their shoes, and
Right.
look at where God has placed you, do what
Mm-hmm.
you have in front of you to the best of your ability,
Mm-hmm.
and and I think that goes both ways. I think that goes for not feeling guilty that you're not someone else or not judging
Mm-hmm.
someone else. I think you shouldn't
Oh, for
judge
sure.
yourself as harshly
You
either.
need to
Although,
extend grace to yourself too.
yeah.
That's how it was for me. Absolutely. With, my husband and I met, our plans were actually to go overseas as
Hmm.
missionaries, and we had medical complications that just kept that from happening. And I did struggle with guilt for years about that, because it was, well, God, I shouldn't be comfortable. I should be out there. And I think I'm learning, like I said, like if I was on the mission field and we were going through all these hardships and the culture shock and the day-to-day stress, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now with these novels and things like that. So I think for me, it's just learning to embrace the times where life is good and peaceful and say, okay, well, how can I use this spot of, peace and relative prosperity and mental energy to do things? How can I use that to focus on prayer and to serve God and to encourage others, as opposed to just feeling guilty and
Hmm.
beating yourself up?
Well, this novel, I would say that one of the most powerful parts of this novel for me was, and it impacted me the very most the first time that I read it. And this time, I admit I was in a hurry. I wanted to finish the book.
Uh-huh.
And so I read
Uh-huh.
through it more quickly, but I was so immersed in this part where, spoiler alert, Hannah is basically about to be executed.
Yes.
And there's this, like, just like I can hear the music playing in the background when it becomes a
Mm-hmm.
movie,
Mm-hmm.
I can
Oh, I
hear
know.
just the powerful, and you see like these things are unfolding. She's singing a hymn and she is at peace. She's
Mm-hmm.
ready. be a martyr for the kingdom of God. And
Right.
I was pulling for her to die.
I've heard that from other listeners too, but you know what? This is a really good spot to pause because actually I'm going to need to plug my computer in and things, and I don't want to cut this short. So
Yes.
let's call this a wrap for this episode of the behind the scenes, but let's do one more after show. So if you're listening, it'll roll out in the next day or two. Let's do one more after show and we'll start there with that scene because I don't want to rush through that because I want to hear your thoughts. And
this is a cliffhanger, guys. You got to come back now.
All right. So we will talk to you again very soon for part 2 of the Torn Asunder after show.
Sounds good.